Where did Ukraine military get its strength? When Russia attacked Ukraine again in 2022, the experts' forecasts were grim. The capital will fall in 3 days, some wrote. In 2 weeks, your state will be gone, American and European officials said dismissively. However, Ukraine has heroically survived its resisting Russian aggression, liberating territories, and as some say, preserving the peace and security of Europe.
3 years ago, did you think that Ukraine would resist like they resisted? Nobody thought that. Let's be honest.
The Ukrainian army has become synonymous with the words courage, heroism, and strength. But let's be honest. 10-15 years ago, we hadn't heard anything about the Ukrainian army, so where did all this success come from? There are many unexpected events in this story. Let us explain. For many years after the restoration of independence, the Ukrainian army didn't inspire confidence and a sense of security. It was just there. But at the time, Ukrainians didn't think that they would seriously have to defend themselves against the very people who were constantly reminding them of their brotherly ties. Of course, we mean Russians. At the time of the Declaration of Independence, the Ukrainian army consisted of about 1 million people. But then the number of personnel gradually decreased. This was done quite deliberately during the time of the Russian puppet Viktor Yanukovych.
Територію нашої держави треба зробити небезпечною.
In 2013, he cancelled the mandatory enlistment in the armed forces of Ukraine. Well, he was definitely not going to fight Russia, and he had to make sure that there would be nothing and no one to fight with. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had huge stocks of armored vehicles, ammunition, and artillery pieces. However, years of mishandling, systematic theft, arms sales to other countries, and then losses in combat during the anti-terrorist operation from 2014 in Donbass left the military in a state of disarray, to put it mildly. Going back to the Yanukovych era, we need to talk about the Minister of Defense, Pavlo Lebedev, in rather uncomplimentary terms. It was he who made the decision to withdraw air defense systems from Ukrainian arsenal, which could cover large industrial areas and destroy enemy aircraft at the borders. In 2013, all S-200V systems based in Kiev, Odessa, Kherson, and Feodosia were removed from combat duty. They had a range of up to 250 kilometers. Given how desperately Ukraine asked for the skies to be closed at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it's impossible not to think that even outdated air defense systems would have been useful. The Ukrainian army at the beginning of the 90s was a kind of Soviet artifact. The service was associated with hazing, humiliation, and corruption, and was perceived as a kind of prison. Some recruits were lucky enough to pay their way out, while others spent 2 years of their lives building summer homes for generals and painting the grass green. Nobody ever thought that defense of the homeland and patriotism was something more real than lines in books or documents. Under pressure from the United States and an eager Russia, Ukraine was moving towards disarmament. It gradually gave up nuclear weapons, anti-personnel mines, and strategic aviation. When Russia attacked Ukraine for the first time in 2014, it became clear that the Ukrainian military needed almost everything from clothes to weapons. And most importantly, they needed a sense that they were not alone, that while they were standing face to face with the enemy, their country stood behind them. Perhaps this is what gave birth to the Ukrainian volunteer movement, which has grown to an absolutely fantastic scale over the years. The army began to recover gradually. It became an honorable thing to defend your homeland. The first months of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022 showed that Ukrainians have a chance to cope even with what seems impossible. Ukrainian statehood, without exaggeration, rests on the shoulders of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And now these forces have not only become many times larger, but they have real combat experience, developed new military technologies, and, no matter how arrogant it may sound, set trends. Today, there are about 1 million people in the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The number of women in the army has also increased significantly, about 70,000, which is 40% more than in 2021. Ukraine is developing its own defense industry. This includes the production of missiles, drones, electronic warfare systems, the modernization of anti-aircraft missile systems, and the increase in ammunition production. Ukraine invented and implemented the world's first fleet of naval drones, which has already proven a great success in the confrontation with the Russian Navy. The Armed Forces of Ukraine now has Unmanned System Forces, a branch of the armed forces that uses air, sea, surface, underwater and ground drones and robotic systems in its combat operations. We are also pioneers here, and other countries are adopting our experience working on their own unmanned forces. And how can I not mention the absolutely unrealistic Nemesis, a heavy Ukrainian drone that Russians cowardly call Baba Yaga. Its operator can control it from Kiev or any other city or place, and the drone will drop ammunition on the occupier at the front. Who could have known, when everyone was going online during the COVID epidemic, that things would eventually come to this?
Yes, science!
It seems that everything we do is what a leader usually does. In 2024, Ukraine was ranked 4th in the global firepower ranking of the strongest armies in Europe. It should be clarified that no military experts approve this rating, and in the 2010s, it was the same rating that recognized Russia as the second army of the world. Operations abroad. Even before the Ukrainian army became as powerful as it is now, Ukraine didn't refuse to help those in need, and this assistance was sometimes more significant than that of other, stronger countries, or it was the only help at all. Over 30 years, Ukraine has participated in 27 UN missions in different regions of the world. About 45,000 Ukrainian military personnel have served in them. Yugoslavia. The first successful participation of independent Ukraine in peacekeeping operations abroad was in the former Yugoslavia, which was torn apart by a war. Only volunteers from various military units throughout Ukraine were selected, and even their parents were asked if they agreed to send their son to war. Ukrainian peacekeepers arrived in Bosnia in 1992. They guarded important facilities, escorted humanitarian convoys, evacuated the wounded and dead, as well as destroyed snipers and unblocked checkpoints and military positions. The Ukrainian peacekeepers faced a dangerous situation in 1995 when they were caught between two fires in the village of Zepa, near the town of Srebrenica. Risking their lives after tense negotiations, Ukrainians rescued more than 2,000 Bosnian civilians from Zepa. During the 3 years of the mission in Yugoslavia, 15 Ukrainian peacekeepers were killed and 50 were wounded. Colonel Andrei Kulish took part in the operation and noted that the value of our presence was that, following the example of peacekeeping activities of all UN foreign contingents, we realized that modern armies can professionally not only fight, but also protect the peace. Georgia. In 1993, Ukraine rescued about 8,000 refugees in the mountains of Abkhazia. The Russians unleashed a war against Georgia in 1992, disguising it as Abkhazian separatism. The Russians claimed that Abkhazia wanted independence from Georgia, and for this it needed the support of so-called Russian volunteers and, of course, Russian weapons. Russia didn't like Georgia's desire to continue on a democratic path, so under the guise of local residents, it invaded the region where almost half of the population was ethnic Georgians. The latter had to flee the war and the ethnic cleansing through a pass in the Svaneti Mountains to reach central Georgia. Thousands of people were stranded in the mountains without food, water, or warm clothing. Georgia didn't have enough resources to help them, so it turned to other countries. Ukraine was the first to respond the very next day. By the way, the UN believed that it would take at least a month to prepare for such an operation, but did people who were literally stuck in the mountains have a whole month to wait? A group of 15 Mi-8 helicopters and about 100 soldiers, as well as 2 naval helicopters and an AN-12 aircraft with the leadership and support units, were sent from Ukraine to Georgia. The flight was risky. It was possible to come under enemy air defense. The Ukrainian military coped on their own without the help of other countries or international organizations. It's interesting and sad at the same time that almost no one knew about such an important mission. The command warned the pilots that it was better not to talk about it so as not to irritate the Russians once again. And this is not the only story about Georgia. When Russia launched its aggression against Georgia in 2008, Ukraine sent not only humanitarian aid but also weapons, air defense and anti-aircraft missile systems, and combat kits for them. Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili said that thanks to these systems we shot down 12 Russian bombers, including a Tu-22, which no one had ever shot down. President Viktor Yushchenko arrived in Tbilisi a few days after the Russian aggression began. At the time, it was unclear whether the Russians would reach the capital as they were confidently advancing deep into Georgian territory. But the Ukrainian president wanted to support the Georgian people and President Saakashvili. It was a confident step towards political leadership and a powerful diplomatic signal. Yushchenko was joined by the presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, and the Prime Minister of Latvia. We have come here today to tell you the following words. Georgia is our friend, Georgians are our friends. These are the most difficult times for Georgia. We say that you have the right to freedom, the right to independence. In the end, the Russians ended their so-called operation, forcing peace by recognizing the independence of Abkhazia and North Ossetia, which they themselves had occupied. Just like in 2022, when Russians recognized Ukrainian lands they occupied in 2014 as independent states. Russians have habitually ignored all peace agreements and deals proposed by the European Union, despite they themselves having signed them. At the same time, it had become clear that world leaders are not ready to act boldly in such acute situations. Russia has not been punished for its aggression against an independent country and non-compliance with the agreements. In fact, these events gave Russia carte blanche to continue military operations wherever and whenever it wants. The Russian war in Ukraine is proof of this. The story of the evacuation in the mountains of Svaneti evokes memories of another daring operation by the Ukrainian military. We remember how in 2022, Ukrainians flew by helicopters to Russian-occupied Mariupol to evacuate the severely wounded and deliver vital supplies. North Macedonia. In 2001, when North Macedonia faced Albanian rebels, Ukraine helped it with weapons. In particular, Ukraine supplied Macedonia with Mi-8 and Mi-24 helicopters, Su-25 aircraft, T-72 tanks and armored personnel carriers. It was a difficult time for North Macedonia, which almost cost it its statehood. At the same time, the situation was such that a new war in the Balkans was likely. After Operation Allied Force in defense of Albanian-populated Kosovo and the bombing of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, NATO was against supplying arms to Macedonia to suppress Albanian separatism. Therefore, NATO troops stationed in Macedonia didn't intervene in the conflict. The West hoped that the Macedonians would negotiate with the Albanians and the issue would somehow be resolved. Ukraine not only provided weapons but also helped train the military and the police. The Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation between the two countries was signed back in 1998, and Macedonian President Boris Tchaikovsky was indeed called Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma's greatest friend. Kuchma himself said that Ukraine was the only country to respond fully to Macedonia's request for help. Looking ahead, it's worth mentioning that in 2022, North Macedonia handed over T-72 tanks and Su-25 aircraft to Ukraine to repel Russian aggression, the same ones that it bought from Ukraine in 2001. It's a kind of cycle for good in the world. Well, times are such that goodness must be done with fists, or rather, with tanks. Iraq. One of the largest foreign missions in the history of independent Ukraine was the presence of peacekeepers in Iraq from 2003 to 2008. George W. Bush called on the world to join the establishment of democracy in Iraq after the US victory over Saddam Hussein. Among other countries, Ukraine responded. In return, Bush promised to support Ukraine's path to the EU and NATO. There is an opinion that by participating in the multinational operation, President Leonid Kuchma wanted to pull himself out of international isolation. This was the case after the scandal of the murder of journalist Georgiy Gungadze and the publication of the Menchenko tapes, and also because of the information about the sale of Kolchuga radar systems to Iraq. Later, the Americans admitted that this information was not proven. It was assumed that Ukrainian peacekeepers would guard oil fields in Iraq, but they ended up taking part in combat. 18 soldiers were killed and more than 40 were injured. More than 6,000 Ukrainian servicemen passed through Iraq. On average, around 1,600 Ukrainian peacekeepers were deployed there at the same time. At a meeting with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Boris Charusik, US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said that, we quote, "Ukraine's decision to withdraw from Iraq will not affect relations between Kiev and Washington. We are grateful to Ukraine for its participation in the Iraqi operation. While not all countries have expressed such a desire, Ukraine has joined those states that ensure stability in Iraq." Congo. Even after the beginning of Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2014, Ukraine continued to participate in peacekeeping missions. The Ukrainian 18th Separate Helicopter Detachment has been serving in the Democratic Republic of Congo since 2012. It consists of about 200 servicemen, several Mi-24 attack helicopters, Mi-8 transport helicopters, and other equipment. The Ukrainian unit also performed combat missions. In 2018, Ukrainians were involved in the large-scale Operation Scorpion. Its goal was to destroy jihadist militant groups from the Alliance of Democratic Forces. They invaded Congo from neighboring Uganda. In 2020, Ukrainian pilots landed an Mi-8 helicopter on the crater of the active volcano Nyamaligira to land a group of volcanologists. And in 2021, the Ukrainian military actually saved people from hot lava while evacuating the population of the city of Goma due to a volcanic eruption. On March 7, 2022, President Zelensky signed a decree to withdraw Ukrainian peacekeepers from other countries. In September, the largest contingent from Congo returned. Afghanistan. After the Taliban radical Islamists occupied Kabul in 2021 and declared full control over the territory of Afghanistan, the issue of civilian evacuation became acute. Ukraine didn't have its own peacekeeping contingent there, but carried out several successful evacuation missions, rescuing its own citizens as well as foreign citizens. To pick up civilians, the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine unit went on foot beyond the safe perimeter of the airport into Taliban-controlled territory. Other evacuation missions didn't dare to take such risky steps. Syria. There is a more recent story of Ukraine's assistance. It's the events in Syria. It's no secret that for many years the Assad dictatorship, which fell in 2024, was supported by the Russians. Russia, being overstretched in its own global terror campaigns, not only in the Ukraine but in other countries as well, found itself with limited resources to invest in the Middle East. This was one of the important factors in the success of the Syrian rebels. But Ukraine didn't just pull back Russian forces to give the Syrian rebels a chance to win. Ukraine is sending humanitarian aid, primarily food, even in the midst of a full-scale war. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine also conducted successful special operations to destroy Russian troops in Syria. Drone strikes were carried out on bases where Russian equipment was located. The Turkish military portal Clash Report stated that it was Ukraine that helped the Syrian opposition to create unmanned aviation. In addition, the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine Special Forces evacuated 34 people, including children from Syria through Lebanon. Ukrainians were also present at the Syrian Sedania death camp during the liberation of its prisoners. Ukrainian journalist and former soldier Stanislav Azeyev reported from the ground. And Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybigier was one of the first foreign officials to meet with the new Syrian leader al-Julani in Damascus. Today, Ukraine is holding back one of the largest armies in the world, of course with the help of Western partners, as is the essence of teamwork and partnership. But it's Ukraine doing the job, the heavy lifting. And if Ukraine loses, Europe will be left alone with the Russians. But not only Europe. This fall will also affect the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. The world order would undergo fundamental changes, and all our memories would be about a world that no longer exists. Therefore, the countries of the free world need to do everything possible to make Russia pay for its crimes and Ukraine to thrive. After all, a strong and free Ukraine is a guarantee of peace on the European continent. As we see in numerous stories in this video all around the world, Ukraine doesn't leave its friends in trouble. Now it's the world's turn not to leave Ukraine behind.